Hello, everybody. We are live. We're going to be talking about basically how to make dialogue not sound the same in this panel today. And I've got some great creators with me. We might have a couple more great creators pop up. So we're going to do the introductions of everyone. So we'll start off with Rob. Rob, tell them who you are.
Hi, I'm Rob Malteri. I'm the creator and writer of Nightwolf over at Lone Wolf Comics, and I've been doing this for the last 3 or 4 years. Released my first issue back in 2017. I've got 3 issues out and working on number 4.
Where can they find you? All your stuff.
So yeah, you can find me at lonewolfcomics.com. That's where my website is. I have an online shop there. I'm also on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Lone Wolf Comics, so you can follow us socially. And also have digital copies on Comixology as well.
Well, also today we have with us
Dan Sehn. How we doing? Publisher of Argo Comics, and now our other imprint, Thunder Zone, which is other people's creator-owned characters. Been publishing with Argo Comics about 15 years, and I guess Argo 5, Sorority of Power, are our most well-known titles. And I do the majority of the writing, publisher, editor, and then beyond that, a whole host of fantastic artists that I've been collaborating with. And Argo 5, we have issue 37 at the printer, so we're running into a pretty good stretch there. And yeah, that pretty much sums it up.
All right, so let's get right into it. How do you each individually write characters differently? I know my process is that once I create a character, they're just in my head. And I can easily write a different sounding character. It's never even been an issue to me. And I've always gotten compliments about that, how people can hear a different narrative. For me, it was always, and I think we talked a little bit about this beforehand, it's about imagining who they are. It's about seeing who they are and having them talk to you while you're creating so you could hear how they talk. And a lot of that, to me, comes from, like, I have understandings of the character, and I'm a great character builder. Like, people build universes, I build characters. And then I make a universe around the character. What are your personal ways to do it? Who wants to start? Rob, you want us to take this one?
Sure. Yeah, I'll go first. Yeah, so when I'm writing and I'm thinking about, like, first I develop the character. I kind of have a world established around them where they're interacting, kind of figure out where they're from, what their mythology, how they fit into it. And then I try to get their personality into it as well. And then for as far as like voice goes, I try to think about, like, and I know this might sound a little weird, but I try to think about who would play them, like if it was ever a live action or an animation, like what their voice would sound like in my head. So I, for example, one of my characters from Nightwolf, Tartarus, he has, or in my head, he sounded like Michael Clark Duncan. So I always imagined that's how he would talk. And then, like, with accents, I love to hear accents, like, on screens. And I always think about, well, how can I write that? And when I was really into X-Men during, like, the late 80s, early 90s, when Chris Claremont was writing, he liked to do a lot of, like, Scottish accents and Irish accents in the books. So I always wanted to play with that, and it's kind of like how I started developing my character Snowpaw, who's from the Highlands of Scotland, and I just want love hearing it, and then seeing it on paper too is like it's cool how you can even hear it in your head as you're reading it. So that's a lot of times it's when I'm doing it, I try, like I said, listening in my head as a movie plays out. As I'm writing, I'm imagining it unfold in front of me or in my mind's eye.
What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, I kind of approached it early on where actually even to the day, some of the characters of Argo 5 were based kind of on Friends personalities. So that in that respect, I kind of having, these long-term friends, you kind of like get a gauge of their rhythm of speech, how they react to certain things. So that always really helped me in fleshing out a character, even to the point where my latest or last Kickstarter that was funded was Pink Puma and Red Rooster, which I based even a bit more on Friends. Because a couple of friends of mine had, I don't know if you recall when bit strips was a thing, and they were really going at it on the bit strips, kind of tearing at each other, what people these days would term frenemies. So, I hadn't seen a lot of that in comics, and a lot of people will say, "Oh, this character is like that one from this comic," and indies are always accused of just ripping off the big two, but it is possible to look outside of comics, such as with this occasion, and get a concept that you feel is, based on things you see in real life. It doesn't always have to be, as someone said, "Oh, that's his Superman, that's his Batman." Usually that just involves having a cape, and all of a sudden that's your Superman or Batman. But just in the respect of, if you do look outside of comics, which when we're talking about characterization and imbuing a personality into a character, it is possible to go outside of comics, even film, which again, another thing that people think comic writers are just mining these things. There is real life out there, and that's where I try to, there could be even just a limited interaction with a person with a lot of personality, where you say, you can kind of like imagine the rest, and you might bring that into a comic book character. It's like, wow, the way that guy was, again, another speech pattern, another way of expressing themselves, even ideology that they're expressing. These are things that you can observe in real people and impart into a comic character. And I think that gives the character a lot more weight than, just what people would think of us just going off of another comic character, which, will only have so much to give. And it's already been done because, Ben Grimm is out there. So doing a Ben Grimm type character doesn't really do anything, doesn't lend a unique voice to the independent comic scene, because those, big two zombies already have Ben Grimm. They know Ben Grimm, so they don't want to come to you for Ben Grimm. You got to give them Ben Schwartz.
All right, so here's one, and this was asked of me before the show, and I actually get asked this a lot because I write a female character. What is your process for writing? We're all males on this panel. What is your process for writing the opposite sex? And have you checked in with females, asking them, does this sound accurate? And are there any things I need to change to learn to write the character? I wouldn't say properly. Let's go with accurately. So, how do you write your female characters?
So I have two older sisters. I'm the only boy growing up, and I have a lot of female cousins. With my family, like I have a huge Italian family, and we're all really close knit. So I was surrounded by female influence growing up my entire life. So I know how they act, I know how they talk, and then even like then growing up, then when I started dating, like they all have the personalities, but there are certain intricacies that you can see, too, that help from my standpoint, and then also like watching, again, growing up with my two sisters, they watched a lot of, romance movies and rom-coms. They watched Ghost and Dirty Dancing, all that, those Patrick Swayze movies in the 80s, and stuff like that. So I was exposed to a lot of that kind of stuff, as well as the stuff that I was interested in, like a lot of the fantasy or cartoons, back as a kid. So it's, I had a very large mixture to kind of pull from. And then, my wife also kind of helps me along too when she's reading, proofing some stuff for me before I send it off to the editor. If I did something that she didn't think was right, she'd be like, correct me, and be the first one to say I did it wrong.
And Dan, what do you think?
Yeah, I would say, as Rob pointed out, I mean, I'll bounce stuff off the girlfriend and, see what she thinks of that. Again, having some characters loosely based on friends, again, from knowing them for years, you might go off something of their personality. So, yeah, you do have to account for the different way you're going to portray a character, and the fact that, yeah, you can't just write them, like your male characters. You have to impart that the difference in perhaps viewpoints, issues that they might encounter. But again, the only way to really do that is going from a female perspective. I've had my sister read some of the comics and give her thoughts. So you just got to be willing to listen to that feedback and try to, infuse the character with what they are telling you, and not just, of course, turn a blind eye to it. That's about it.
So, all right. This is a weird question that I get asked a lot, and I always giggle and laugh about it. People ask me, how do you write a character that you're not accustomed to understanding? Not just a woman, but if you were to write an LGBT character, or if you were going to write a character that is a different race. And the reason I giggle about this is it almost implies that I can't have an understanding about anyone but myself. And because I grew up in New York City and I grew up in a very multicultural area, I grew up in the melting pot of the world, it's been called. I never took that as a serious question for myself because I was lucky enough to be brought up around very, just honestly, I think there's hundreds of different groups in New York City, not even exaggerating. So I got to meet a huge amount of people. So it never was hard to me, but that's my experience. I'll leave it to you guys. Do you find you have trouble when you're writing a character that's either a different race, a different nationality, a different religion? Are those issues for you guys? Do you find yourself maybe reaching out to people again, trying to write that character more genuinely?
I think more so that, like, I don't want to offend anybody if I do something that if anything, I write them as I would anybody else. I give them their voice, their thoughts, and then I try not to get into like too much into like deep into cultural stuff, like because again, I can't attest to a lot of things. I mean, the only things that people I've met, I've worked with several people of different race, color, and sexuality choices in seeing how they are. I feel like they're just like anybody else. They just sometimes have a different mannerism or the way they talk, so that just kind of adds to the character. So, and I don't try, and with my comics, I don't try to get into sexuality that much. Just try and keep it more, under PG-13, if you will, or around there. Maybe a little rated R, just as far as action and gore, but so I think that as long as I try and stay within, that character's, like I said, mannerisms and speech patterns, and then I've have a few friends that I've actually reached out to, which they think that I've done a pretty good job so far with, trying to stay true without getting too much into anything. But yeah, I mean, again, I think it's just, everybody has their own speech pattern, interests. It's trying to keep, like I said, within that character's, way of speaking.
Dan, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, well, yeah, like yourself, I'm in New York, so you are exposed to a wide variety of people. So yeah, you do perhaps have a good amount to draw on just from your interactions, and just having a vocation that interacting with a lot of people, so you kind of get to seeing a wide variety of people and situations. That gives you a pretty good perspective of, again, not a full perspective of everything within their lives, but within the comics, you're not really, showcasing, perhaps just like Rob said, you might not have a adult comic, so you're not really getting that much into the sexuality. And it's important to remember that that's just a facet of people. No one, you have to think of the character again in more real life terms, where you're not just portraying the character in one facet of their life, which again, sexuality is one facet. No one should be just, defined in that respect. What you put on your sandwich at Subway has nothing really to do with your sexuality. It's more about, again, presenting a well-rounded character and, yeah, exhibiting a variety of traits, just as people are all individuals. But again, not just focusing to the point where it almost becomes a caricature of any certain, group.
Now, I will say this, and we're bringing in Meredith right now, who's going to be joining us, and she'll give us a female perspective. I will say this, the reason I also giggle about it is that no one ever asks you, well, how do you feel comfortable talking about a killer? Like, when you're writing a killer, do you go investigate a killer? Have you spoken to killers and mass murderers? No one ever asks that. So I do think it's sometimes people are looking to question whether or not we can see with our eyes and write a good story. And I always say to judge a story by its words and read it and then give a review. I know it sounds outlandish. I have to read a book to have an opinion, but yes, that's how it works. What do you think, Meredith? I know you said you enjoy writing male characters. Why do you enjoy writing male characters? And please explain to the world who you are.
Hello, everybody. I am Meredith Lochran, and I am with Geek Insider, and I am also a fiction writer. Not so much into comic books, but I am starting to tiptoe into that because I am just with all of you guys who are in this realm. And, and it's something that I've always wanted to try, but never had those connections. And so I love platforms like this where we're making those connections to expand those writing horizons. But I love writing characters and I love writing dialogue because I think it comes from just a lifelong habit of sitting and observing people and how they interact with each other, what kind of language, keeping in mind where you are. So when it comes to writing dialogue, do they have an accent? How are you typing that out? And all that stuff. And then tapping into whether or not you're being an alpha or if you're being a beta character. And, how do they react? And really understanding what their backstory is, like what motivates them. So if you're writing and you don't know who your character is, chances are you're not going to connect with your audience either, because then it just feels canned. So when I write a male character, it's kind of funny because my husband says that I have balls that clank, and
Yeah.
and and part of that is just that stronger personality of take charge. And it's like, okay, well, if I know my character well enough and I know how he's going to react to certain things, and I know what his language barriers are, as far as does he cuss, does is he sweeter, is he a mama's boy, it doesn't really matter. But knowing who he is basically from the inside out, and back character, what motivates him, that all helps the dialogue move along and become realistic.
So let me ask you, with that in mind, being realistic, how many of you actually write characters you know? In other words, you're basing them on a human being and you are just using what you think they would say. Like, how much of real life goes into your dialogue for your characters?
So for my first issue of Nightwolf, there was a lot of friends influenced a lot of these characters and events. So it was easily to write them because I knew how they would talk. I knew, like, there was conversations that we had that I thought, why isn't somebody like filming us, because we would be a crazy sitcom or something like that, or even just like kind of like Jackass, we do stupid stuff and, we laugh at each other. So it's like things like that if a bunch of us are getting together and laughing about stuff, so why not, use some of that, and I always, have that in my head, write what you know. And, you hear these, especially if you're around somebody a lot, you hear their voice in your head more than anybody else sometimes. So it's easy to take that person and inject their personality into a character.
Meredith, you have anything to add on to that? You had a little bit of a smile there for a minute. It looked like you were thinking of people already.
I was just thinking about a friend of mine who she writes romance novels, but she has a lot of these alpha males. She loves to write about the Navy SEALs and things. So there's some buff, there's some action and things like that. And she's done a lot of research and actually talking to these guys to see their lingo and all this stuff. And and of course with a romance, she's got a damsel in distress, and maybe she's kidnapped or something like that. So she's like, well, how do I get into her brain? And so what she did was she actually duct taped herself to the chair to try and escape and see what that felt like. And her husband happened to walk by and look in, and he just went, you know what I mean? And so whatever you do to try and get into the mind of the character so that you can see what they're struggling with and get that inner voice, that language and how people react, and certainly that reaction from her husband was used later on. So yeah, definitely we take our experience and things like that. But I mean, if you're writing horror and thrillers and, you're writing about serial killers, you don't have to go out there murdering people to understand what that feels like. We take these experiences and we associate it to what would it be like, and we make a person based on that. But I mean, I kill people in my head all the time.
It's so funny. I jokingly say this, but it's true. I'm haunted by my characters. I've never had a problem with actual character development or character voices. Believe it or not, they come very easily to me. It's always been the world around them and the story around them when I was younger that I struggled with, because I hadn't had that life experience. And I think life experience plays into being able to make a character sound different. But I think one of the biggest challenges in comic books is making them sound different when they're talking to each other so closely, especially when you're having a team aspect. How do you guys tackle a conversation where it's more than 2 or 3 people at once, and you have to nail the fact that each one of them needs to sound different every step of the way. Do you go out of your way to make them sound different, or do you just write what that character would say and don't worry about if something at that moment might sound a little close to another character? So how do you handle the group conversation?
Well, yeah, a lot of my books are actually groups. Argo 5 being my main title. Then you have like Impact International, Team North America. I mean, actually, growing up, Justice League Avengers was always like the top books. So and X-Men. So teams seemed much better to me. With Thunder Zone, I recently branched out more to individual characters, but I always was into the team. Yeah, and as I stated before, a lot of it based on friends. So that gave me like, with this situation happening, who would probably be the first to react and how would they react? So again, it became, and now, like I said, 37 issues in, I kind of have a rhythm of who would be the first to react, how would they react, how would the other person react to that. But just skipping back to the last question, which I really didn't address, I think it's important to remember, and it's hard for the readers even to keep this straight. We are writers, so we are not those characters. And sometimes a new writer might get into this trap of not wanting to represent a character because that's not their viewpoints. They don't want people to think they think that way or whatever. I had a friend who, little loose friend, being that he was a bit of a womanizer, so weren't that close. But there are guys that are womanizers. You can't escape it. They're out there. So, like, to put a character in the book who's a womanizer, that is, again, addressing the real world. And you'll see that other people have negative reactions to that, as they should. But to worry about, like you're saying, if you're going to have a serial killer, people will accept if you're writing a villain that you're not that villain. But you also, and that was what actually separated from Marvel from DC, is the fact that the DC characters were kind of just bland and completely goody two shoes, and then the Marvel, they had real life problems, and some of them weren't the greatest people, whatever, and the Thing and Torch would argue and stuff like that, and so I think it's important to remember that you can write outside of yourself. Don't feel constrained to just have characters that are all, the epitome of human behavior, because, unfortunately, that's not realistic.
Rob, did you want to? I saw you about to say something.
Yeah. So, I mean, same kind of having that influence of, seeing how the X-Men work as a team and how they're all personalities are all different. And even, in looking at real life, you talk to people on a daily basis that everybody has their own personality. And, you see, when you are in a group discussion, how these personalities react with each other. And you can even, sometimes people are really good at having a poker face, so they hide that. But, if somebody wears their emotions on their sleeve, you can see their reactions to other people's, even in like meetings. Like if, for example, like on my, like a regular day, if I'm in a business meeting or whatever for work, and, somebody says something, not necessarily that affects others, but you can see when somebody is affected by that. So, it's taken that into consideration. Like when you're looking at other people throughout your day, be observant of like how they react to you and how they react to others, and how they, their conversations, that's how group, it's a back and forth, and if it's a one-sided thing, then it's not a conversation. So you have to throw in that, give and take. And if you have polarizing personalities, that's that's the more entertainment there, seeing how they react with each other. And then being able to show that in your panels. I think if you can capture that just right, then you have gold right there.
And one of the things that I wanted to say was that I'm not a comic book writer, but when it comes to group scenes, I would think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when you're doing these groups, you can give each character their own panel, so you know whose head you're in. But when it comes to writing fiction, which is what I do, you have to be very conscious of the point of view. Whose head are you in? And base their conversations around that. So if I'm in my own head and I'm writing in the first person, and then the next paragraph is what someone else is thinking, that gets confusing for a reader. I can't possibly, if I'm in my point of view and I'm writing that way, I can't possibly know what they're thinking, but I can think I know what they're thinking, and I can express it that way. So it's a matter of turning that around. And so when it comes to the group dynamic, you have to think of it, okay, whose head am I in? And then you look out there and go, okay, how are people reacting to that? How are they responding to me? What are they saying? What are their their physical motions and reactions and things like that. So, I think on the comics side, again, you can assign a panel and let us know whose head you're in when it comes to that group dynamic. But when it comes to fiction writing, you have to be very careful. Otherwise, it gets very confusing and frustrating for the reader.
I think that the suspension of disbelief is important, and by not being able to maintain a constant awareness of who is speaking, that can definitely do it, and remove a person from that fantasy world they've entered. So let me ask you guys a question: when you're writing as a writer, do you hear the characters' voices with different actual tones and if you're hearing a female voice, does it sound feminine? Do you actually assign them? Like, I have characters in my head that have, like Meredith had brought up, the accents. They have actual voices in my head, and it'd be weird to see them turn into movies or television, because then they'd have a new voice that I've never heard before, and I'm sure it would be jarring. I hope to be challenged by that, but I think it would be jarring because I've always heard them, and I've dreamed of my characters. So in my mind, they've already become real. Do you guys, while you're writing, hear a different voice for each character, literally, like even the way it sounds?
Yeah, I would say so, but there is one caveat to that, and the fact that you talk about accents and stuff like that, and of course it's a very PC environment we live in. So I might have a friend who does speak with an accent, or even, let's say, broken English. If you translated that into a comic, somehow, like with The Hangover, and you had Chow, and his over the top portrayal, somehow in print it seems to glue onto people a little more in some way, especially comics not being as legitimized as movies, so that if you would portray someone like that, it would probably not go over well. So it's kind of like walking a fine line into portraying a character, and even again, somewhat known to me as a friend, but having to, to some degree appease the environment that we're living in. So, it takes a little, I guess, judgment as a case-by-case thing. And, not everyone, you might have someone saying, oh, a sentence doesn't start with a preposition. But if you have a friend who always starts a sentence with a preposition, you'll have, people going, oh, this guy, he should have hired, not to go back to Rob's other point, you should have hired an editor. But people will go into that like, oh, didn't this guy know the rules of grammar? But again, where do you draw the line as far as portraying a character realistically as they are? And that's again where I tend to shift towards. If someone wants to criticize that part, that the grammar wasn't correct. This guy doesn't speak in correct grammar. What do you want? I'm gonna go that direction.
Anyone else want to jump on that? Because I can say that just for me, I don't give a crap about grammar when I'm writing dialogue. I write it as it is spoken out loud, and I fight every editor who's ever tried to edit my dialogue. And unless there's a spelling mistake, I tell them to suck it. And I go, I'm not changing it. That's how the character says it. And they're like, wrong? Too bad. That's how. Say it out loud and then say the way you want me to change it out loud. And 90% of the time for the editors I worked with, they've all come back and said, yeah. The 10% that didn't were like, Rob, that's a little messed up. You have to tone it down a bit, or that's very sexually charged. You might not want to have it that way. So I don't know. That's just me. But 90% of the time, I don't care what an editor says about dialogue. Dialogue's the one place there's no room for editing for me. Only spell checking can be done with that. But what about you, Rob? Do you worry about a character's grammatically correct word?
I think when it comes to like writing the panel description, it's fine to be, grammatically correct, because then that way it's easy for whoever's doing your artwork to read it. But I think speech-wise, people don't talk grammatically correct unless there are personalities that do that. And if you're writing to that, that makes sense. But nobody right now I'm talking probably just as many, like broken languages or whatever, I'm not speaking grammatically correct. And, so each person has a different voice. Each person speaks differently, and they pronounce words differently. And if you're going to have the, even around here, like you have people who speak what we call Yinzers in Pittsburgh. Then you have the people in Cleveland who have a different, accent as well. They and then compared to, where I'm at here in the very middle, somebody says milk or mulk, or, what I mean? Like they say gat or god, they say different things, different manners. Like, and you have to, if you're going to express that in words, like on paper, like you have to write that the way it sounds. So, and if somebody comes and tells you, well, you're not doing it right. Well, like you said, Rob, I mean, it's, say it to yourself in that manner. Does that sound like the person who's speaking? I've had a couple go backs with my editor about it and saying, this is exactly why I did. And he's like, oh, okay, cool.
Well, I'm in New York. We don't have an accent.
I think that's Varian. Are you with me?
What happened to Rob?
Varian?
Yeah.
There we are. Varian's with us. Our sensitivity trainer is here, and my sensitivity editor. He's here to tell us why we're all wrong about how we write the way we write and dialogue. What's going on, Varian?
Hey, how's it going? I just came in. I don't know why anybody's wrong yet. No, I when it comes to dialogue, and you guys probably already said this, but I had a young lady I worked with a while ago, and she was writing dialogue for a character, and it didn't sound like the type of dialogue that would come out of this character's mouth. This type of character would speak. She was writing. He's got a coonskin cap on. Somebody's got to do it.
I figured since you had no picture, I have to fill in here.
Yeah. Yeah. My camera's having some issues. I do have mine on. Let me see if I can get my camera to work. It's just being difficult. It'll start working like right when I sign off or something. But yeah, no dialogue. I appreciate that. That looks awesome. We should all have a coonskin cap day. Yeah, when you're writing dialogue, she had a character that was a scientist, well educated, and she sounded like she barely got out of 5th grade. And I was concerned. I thought that it was I told her, I said that doesn't sound right. And she accused me after speaking to someone else who makes comics, who I won't name, who I respect. She accused me of trying to whitewash her script. And I'm like, First of all, I'm not trying to whitewash the script. The script isn't. I mean, that's impossible. But she told me that that I was taking the flavor out of her script, and I just didn't know that you're going to have a metaphysicist who's 37 years old say, girl, you know better than that. I'm like, I just didn't think that was going to be something that was going to be said. So I tried to correct some of those errors, and she got mad at me. But she hasn't put the comic out either now. So who knows what happened. But I try to say the words before if I write anything down. I try to say it before if that sounds like that would come out the character's mouth. If that sounds like an actual statement that character would make. I hate to say it, but sometimes, the character's nationality, the character's background does come into play when you're doing things like that. I had a teacher, English teacher, that could do. She was so talented. I think she wasted her skills teaching us. She could have been a voice actress, but she would do these accents, and she could nail them all perfectly. Irish, Scottish, Southern, just all of them. And we loved to have her read to us because she would do these accents. And nowadays she'd probably be canceled and kicked out of class for that. But she understood that too, and she taught me a lot about that when writing.
Can I just pop in here? My gut check reaction to the writer's reaction to your feedback actually makes me very angry because obviously, I mean, for me, it just seems obvious that you have to be a little bit intuitive and a little bit of an empath, I think, when you're writing for certain characters. And so, if she maybe saw what these characters looked like and that was the voice that she came up with, and she's like dead wrong, it's like, you're not bringing the right voice here, just so you're not feeling this guy. Yeah. And I think that's a big part of it, is that you have to kind of be intuitive a little bit into the character and where he's going. And, again, it comes with that history of knowing who the character is. She obviously didn't know it. And for her to say, oh, well, you're whitewashing my script, that just makes me so mad.
Yeah, it was interesting to know that as a black man, I could whitewash a script too. That was that was shocking. But I was like, okay, I guess. She never put the book out. If she did have character models, but she wasn't an artist. So what she did, she went and printed out pictures of celebrities that she thought would fit the character. And this scientist, she used pictures of Stephanie McMahon. That's who's a wrestling. If anybody here watches WWE, Stephanie McMahon is Vince McMahon's daughter, and she used pictures of her and said, "This is who the Doctor looks like." And I'm like, Stephanie McMahon isn't using slang. Like, I can't see, especially if she's, highly educated, and she's not gonna, speak the way you have her writing.
Just because she looks like her doesn't mean she sounds like her.
Right. I mean, at the same time, I told her, I said, you can do it, but don't get mad when, people call you out for it. You can do whatever you want, but I think there's a possibility you get called out for it later.
Now, let me ask you a question, and this one's an interesting one, and it's going to be, I'm sure, a harder one to answer, but we're going to talk about it anyway. Does there have to be this, and Varian, you're my sensitivity trainer, so you can help me with this. Does there have to be a moment where, despite how realistic you might think it is, and even if you have a friend who sounds just like that, do you have to watch how you write a character because you don't want someone to think you're making fun of a culture? That might be how your friend sounds, but it could also come off demeaning. Perfect example of this was Transformers, where we had those two twin bots, and they came under such fire. And no one saw that as a problem until someone saw it as a problem. So to all of you, how do you handle that?
I'll let someone else go first, because my answer is a little long, but go ahead.
The episode of the new Star Wars, not the newest Star Wars, but the other new Star Wars, what was that, 5, 6, and 7, think they came under fire for that as well. Incidentally, I got rid of the raccoon hat because people thought I was variant, and he doesn't have a screen. I didn't want people being all confused here. So I went back to Shazam. But yeah, well, that's the point I was making before, in the fact that again, you might come under fire for being insensitive to some group, and again, where I said having friends who speak like this, and it's somewhat stereotypical, but it doesn't really fly in comics. You have to kind of make judgment calls along the way and say, what is acceptable, what is not. It almost comes down to, each line you can say the heck with it and everything like that, and just go with realism, which a lot of times that's where I'm going to tend to go. But you do have to just be able to accept the feedback that comes from that. When you do have people say, oh, and maybe you have to say, look, this is how my friend talks. What do you want? It's based on friend. But we're in a public forum here where, you're not just writing a book that you're going to print and have it in on your own bookshelf. You're putting it out to the masses. So, you have to take that into account and try to figure out in each instance what's going to be right and what's going to be accepted and what's going to cause more trouble than it's worth.
I think too, it also depends on how you treat the characters in the story as well. For going back to the Transformers, those two bots were basically meant for comic relief, which I think also made it more insulting. But I think if you have a character you're writing specifically for because you like this character, you want them to have a certain aspect or a certain they're playing a certain part that's more meaningful, and if you're not doing it to be if you're writing it just to be like, oh well, this is funny to me, that's not the way to do it. I mean, you need to handle that kind of dialogue with a little more care and intent. And I think if you feel strongly about a way a character, their personality, their voice, and how they, as long as it fits to the character, you can't just force it in there and expect it to make sense either. If it's just thrown in there, sloppily, it doesn't work. And then it's, again, you run that risk of really, making somebody unhappy with how you're treating that, especially if they feel like that's how they speak. And oftentimes, if you do have a character that you feel like this is their personality, this is how they talk, then they're a big part of the story because they're important, not just because I want to make fun of it. I think, that's shown in your writing too. That there's intent there. And if you're, you can attest to that. And if if you get a little bit of backlash and you can quickly be like, well, this is why they're there. This, you really, and oftentimes too, if you do it right, you don't have to explain yourself. It's apparent in the writing, in the story. But, maybe if you do have to explain yourself, then maybe it's not working the way you thought it did.
Am I the only one that actually liked the twins in that in that movie? And I liked them because they, the voice actors who did that, they portrayed these characters. They portrayed them as juvenile delinquents, with maybe a specific background. And I thought that was okay because they seemed like authentic characters to me. But I also know people who talk like that and act like that. So it wasn't that big a deal. And I think as content creators, especially indie creators, we have such a, I think we have such an important role to have that authentic voice and put that out there. And I think it's our responsibility to really give a true voice to certain areas and be willing to take the pushback from people who want to have this, this PC culture bullshit. And I'm going to call bullshit because if we have to curb our language and the way we are expressing how we view the world that we're writing, then we might as well hang up our pens.
Variant.
Yeah.
You have to have that authentic voice.
Can I answer Meredith's question whether I like the twins or not?
Go ahead.
No, I'm asking you my sensitivity. Well, answering it.
Oh yeah. No, it's fine. It's a Michael Bay movie.
Okay. I really like the twins and was upset when people got mad at them because I literally had two friends who talked just like them and argued.
That's what I'm
just
saying.
like them. And I was like, wait a minute. Why are my friends racist?
Right.
I didn't understand it.
I love those characters.
I don't even remember the twins. Is that the one with John Goodman robot? I mean, is that
it's the third
Mark or with the kid?
Still was shy. It's the third one with Devastator.
Was it the third one?
I believe it was the third one because Devastator had his little. It might have been. Was it the second
Was
one?
that Mark, or was that the?
Well,
it was still shy.
Yeah, it was the one where Devastator had the metal balls, which I was just like, oh my god. I mean, I think for me it was more like they ruined the characters, because I grew up with the classic '80s, so like it was more so that like I think the way their portrayal of Devastator to that was like, oh man, really?
Yeah. When it comes to that, I didn't. I mean, you got to remember. I grew up hearing people talk just like that. I would have got my ass kicked for talking like that too. But my parents kept me steeped in books and everything to avoid that type of thing. But it wasn't that shocking to me. They weren't as shocking as there's two crows.
Heckle and Jekyll.
Heckle and Jekyll, yeah. It's like, well, I know who they're supposed to be. And
character of the 70s here. This is
yeah.
This is where I can shine. 80s, I don't really know that one.
Yeah. Heckle and Jekyll, I knew who they were supposed to be. It was very clear. But I mean, you got to be when you're writing that, you're writing a character, it's good to kind of make sure you don't fall into parody. And I think that might be the problem some people feel with that the Transformers twins, was that it started to seem like parody after a while, even though I don't think and I hope the filmmakers didn't intend for it to be, I think they tried to make genuine characters comedy relief. I mean, and they didn't. If you look at how Toy Story has Key and Peele doing two characters that are attached to each other, and they kind of come across as buffoonish and whatnot, but it's comedy relief. And I didn't put a color to the characters. However, knowing who they are behind that, I did kind of see Key and Peele, and I'm like, oh, of course they're, look at them, they're buffoons. But it was a fun movie, and I think all those movies, like Transformers movies, you just turn your brain off and just watch, and you don't think too much, because the minute you ever notice you can't enjoy a Transformers movie? Like the first one you can, but like you can't enjoy a Transformers movie for like the first 20 minutes. That's because your blood hasn't drained out from your brain yet. Once that happens, like within the 20-minute mark, you're like, hey, this ain't so bad, because your brain is shut down. The minute you stand to go to the bathroom or get something to drink, that's why you call it refrigerator watching. You open the refrigerator up, you're like, hey, wait a minute, that doesn't work. And you but yeah, with the writing, as long as it doesn't come across as parody, you should be fine. And as long as it come across, you can always go ask somebody too. I'll go ask a friend. When I was young and started writing, I had a friend. I was writing a character that was a Catholic priest, and I had him make a comment about his ex-wife, and my friend said, "Whoa, wait a minute! Catholic priests can't be married. They can't have wives." And I said, what? My friend was Catholic. So he gave me the information. I'm like, oh, well, that changes some story elements. So I remember telling another friend of mine whose dad was a reverend. And I said, yes, I told him, I said, I didn't know, Catholic priests couldn't be married. So I might have changed the denomination of the priest character in my script. And he said, well, what's going on? I said, well, Catholic priests, they can't be married. They can't have relationships. They can't have sex. And he says, well, you know, and then he told me, he said, you need to do some more research. And I did. And, you know, I still have the character in my story. He's been changed a little bit. Actually made the story a lot richer. But, and the way he speaks has been changed a bit because it's so easy that you're typing. You're one person. So you're writing this story out and every character speaking in your voice. And if you're doing that, you made a mistake already.
I think to a certain degree also when we're writing dialogue, we have to read it out loud just to see how it flows, you know? And if we have to put on those goofy voices, like for me, saying it out loud, I hear differently, you know, my voice than how you hear me. But when I'm saying the dialogue out loud and I'm trying to give it a different voice, I'm actually hearing something different in my brain. You know, so that helps carry it along. So I don't know if that made any sense to anybody or if I just, you know, sound like I'm crazy. But I think that's such an important tool is whether you're giving them an accent, whether you're giving them some kind of, you know, like a cultural differential, let's just say, to be authentic for that. And like you were saying, Varian, you know, don't make it parody, you know, try to be true to the voice, try to be true to the character, and make it as authentic as possible. Speak it out loud so that the conversation flows and it makes sense. You know, and that goes with, again, writing for accents and things. You know, when I write and a character has a Southern accent, I cut off all the G's on the, you know, anything that ends with ing, and I, you know, and it looks crappy on paper, but it reads right. So I'm also trying to I'm trying to immerse the reader into that world as well and have them understand this is the language. This is how they talk. And if I'm not being true to my character, then there's no point in writing the book. And if somebody doesn't like it, that's their choice. You know, because you can't please everybody in any of these creative endeavors. You can try, but you're building your own community, and maybe you're doing that because you're giving your characters that authentic voice.
I agree.
All right, so what we're going to do right now is we're all going to say goodbye, but we can stay on for the overtime show. The reason we're saying goodbye is Rob did have to leave, and I figure we'll get our goodbyes away, and then we'll have a conversation in overtime until we feel like we've all exhausted the conversation. I do want to talk more about the PC culture as being someone they have tried to cancel and when unsuccessful. I do have some comments about that. So we're going to talk about dialogue writing in this new PC world that, as George Carlin would say, is bullshit. So before we do that, we're all going to say goodbye. So we're going to start with Rob. Rob, go ahead. Tell them who you are and where they can find you.
Yeah, I am Rob Malteri. I'm the creator and writer of Nightwolf. You can find my comics at lonewolfcomics.com. We're also at Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Lone Wolf Comics. And we're digitally on Comixology as well. Thank you.
And Dan
Sehn, publisher of Argo Comics. You can check out argocomics.com, argocomics.com. And we also are on Indie Planet as our main source of distribution. So indieplanet.us.argocomics, I believe. But if you go to Indie Planet and you just search Argo, any one of our listings has a bar that says Argo Comics on it. You click on that. All the titles show up. I believe we're up to 79 now comics that are available on Indie Planet. But on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Argo Comics, or Dan Sehn, Sehn, S-E-H-N, silent H, throws people off. Rob, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
But Argo Comics and Dan Sehn on social media.
And we'll go with Meredith.
Hey, everybody, I'm Meredith Lochran. I am with geekinsider.com. You can reach us at geekinsider.com. Most of our social media is Geek Insider or Geek Insiders with an S at the end. I do a Lady Geek live show every Sunday at 5 o'clock Eastern Time, and that's just a 30-minute spot, and I'm just BSing because I haven't figured it out yet. But hey, it was fun. Follow us. Oh, Geek Out Virtual Con is coming April 11th and 12th. And we have some panels. We have special guests. We have door prizes. It's free for everybody to view. It's going to be live streaming on YouTube and our Facebook channel. So tune in.
Go ahead, the Kid Grant.
Yeah. Well, you can find me at KYD_V on Twitter, Variant Grant on Facebook, LastCallComics.com, some publishing company. You can find us on every social media. Just look up Last Call Comics. And of course, I'm the founder of IndieVolt Media, IndieVolt.com, which you can find, on the internet. Also, make sure you download IndieVolt Radio on Google Android devices, and you can also listen into that on Streamer. That's an app on iOS, which you can tune into the IndieVolt Radio from there. And if you're stuck in the house, which we all pretty much are, IndieVolt TV is on Roku, and it's free. It's over-the-top streaming network, a bunch of independent movies, documentaries, and stuff on there for you.
All right, guys. So now we're going to head over into overtime. But Rob, I know you got to go. Thank you for being part of this. Dan, do you have to go too? This is
I'm okay.
And Meredith, are you good for overtime?
I am for a bit.
All right. Just let us know if that changes. And I'm going to let Varian kick this off. And again, thank you, Rob, for being here. Varian, we're going to have a whole panel next week about PC and comics. But with dialogue writing, do you think that capturing a person, even if they live up to a stereotype that is out there, that is wrong if you're capturing a character that is genuine? Like if you're going to write about someone from your own childhood and you're putting them in a book and they sound a certain way, is that still wrong if someone gets offended? Do we have to stop and be like, I can't write it that way because someone might get offended?
I don't think it is. I think that but I'm a weird type of person. I believe that if you have a character that is, like, for instance, you take a character like, I think a lot of people look at Will Eisner and they're very quick to throw the racist label on Will Eisner, very quick, because of Ebony White. And they don't really realize what he was trying to do with that character of Ebony White. And Randy says it, or says like, get off your high horse, get an education, and understand what he was trying to do with that character. He was the smartest character there. So people who like those who are out right now saying, oh, I love this movie because it subverted my expectations, they need to look at that again. I suggest to look at the Spirit with that same set of eyes. Because that character was often the smartest. He knew what everything, the whole plot was before even the Spirit. And he was often the character that saved the day. He doesn't get enough credit, but if you're doing that, I think the fine line between that and racism is that if all of the characters begin to act that way, because I've seen racism labeled as if I ask anybody here to tell me about a small town in I would say Detroit, 1987. Draw me a neighborhood. Tell me about this neighborhood in Detroit. And anybody comes up with it, they're gonna probably come back with, anybody who does a little bit of research, and come back with a black family. They just are. Because Detroit is predominantly black, especially in 87. So they're gonna come back with that, and there are people who will say, oh my goodness, well, why do you have everyone on the street black? I've seen people do this, and it really irritates me because they have characters, they get mad, they want revisionist history. But me and Meredith talked about it last time. There was a scene in the movie where the characters went back in time, and there were blacks, Hispanics, and whites all congregating together as if, there was no racism. And that's, hey, perfect. I mean, to be honest with you, that it looks beautiful, but we know it wasn't that way. And it's kind of whitewashing history. That is whitewashing history. And that is trying to make us, in a way, not even preparing the younger generations for what actually happened. And, those who forget the past are doomed to repeat it anyway. So I think when you're doing those parodies, I got off track a little bit there, but when you get on those parodies, you got to be, when you're doing those characters, you have to be careful. If one character is like that, that's fine, because that could be their personality. If you have every character of that particular nationality behaving in that manner, then that comes across as racism. And that's where I think that line is drawn.
I could respect that, actually, because if you're making every single character sound the same way, then it's not you envisioning a character, that's how you see that particular race or gender is what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And that makes a lot of sense, because I wouldn't want necessarily anyone with a fetish to always sound the same way. Thank you, 50 Shades of Grey. So what do you guys think about a world where your dialogue matters, where even what your villains now say can be held against you? And of course, we're in the overtime segment, so we acknowledge that this is being taped during the coronavirus. We're all hoping that when the coronavirus is over, everyone is with this magical world when the doors open and suddenly everyone is kind to each other and we're back to being not full of shit. And the PC has gone away, and Safe Space and Snowflake are no longer characters at Marvel. And I'm not making a joke about that. They really, as of this moment, are a threat. Do you guys think that we can actually write honestly when it comes to dialogue? So I've seen a couple friends get caught up in some nonsense about things they've said. And again, I've been part of the cancel culture. The only problem was they couldn't cancel me. And when you can't cancel a person, they try again, but they don't come back. Do you think more creators just have to be like, you know what, screw you? They have to Dave Chappelle it and be like, I don't care, cancel me. Do your best. I'll be right here. What do you think, Varian? Does it have to be a big F you to everyone?
I think sometimes, yeah. I think sometimes you're going to have to just say, you know what, I'm doing this and do it. And the worst they're going to do is, the worst they're going to do is try to cancel you or not talk to you anymore. And I'll guarantee you this, this industry is too small not to talk to you again. I seen somebody write something the other day and I thought how sad that was. They said, you don't have to talk, I'm used to not working with people because, of things I've heard about them, like they're not good to work with, or they try
You're talking about Kyron's thing.
Say again?
You're talking about Kyron's thing?
No. It was someone else. It was a post in one of those many comic book artist created communities. But this person said that I'm used to not working with people because I hurt their buttholes, or that they don't pay right, or their politics. And that last part really irritated me, because I'm like, I don't care about your politics. I don't. It's sad. In this medium, we used to come together despite our politics, despite our beliefs. We used to come together to celebrate the religion of comics, and now we don't. Now we have to let that ugliness from the outside creep in and override the whole thing. It used to be, I used to joke with my wife. I'm like, I wonder how many people have bought, because I do have this thing that I do. I leave my wife at the table and I leave her at the table, and I leave Lola there, and she's making all the sales. And people come buy the art, and they buy books, and they buy all this stuff. You see my table right there in my graphic. They buy all that stuff. And I joked with her a long time ago. I said, I wonder how many people are like, Lola's white. She's Italian. I wonder how many people are Klansmen who come and bought stuff like, oh, I love this art, and bought it and have it hung up in their room. And they don't know a black man drew it. And it's like, because that type of thing, it's bigger than racism. You don't care. Oh, I like that art, and you buy it, and you don't care who made it. Especially if you don't know who made it. And we used to come together in this medium, and now everything has to be about politics. You have to do a background search on the people that you're working with, and that's sad. I don't care if Rob voted for Trump or if he voted for Hillary. I just don't care. It doesn't make Rob who he is. The only time that I'm going to be upset is if I found out that Rob, voted for himself. That would upset me because then, like the threat of making him president of the United States is just too much for me.
Hey, I deserve to win.
Yeah,
2020.
No, God, no. Everyone will have kids. Barbara and Lee should become required reading in schools at the age of 15. Not because Rob wants to teach children, because Rob wants to fatten his pockets. That's what it'll be.
We do have the actual all ages version coming out soon. Because damn them, yes, I'm going to make something that young teens can read. Come get me.
Well, there is,
you should do that.
There is a much more divisiveness over in Twitter, actually. I mean, I don't know about you guys. It seems like we're big Facebook users and everything like that. But if you pop over to Twitter, it seems like Comicsgate is something that's very, very much on people's consciousness over there. And you talked about, whether or not you voted for this guy or that guy. It just seems over there on Twitter, it's just like, have you supported any Comicsgate? And either the people who supported it or didn't support it, and whichever side of that fence you fall on, you're just like in the enemy camp for certain people. I never even, I don't fully understand it, because I know initially it was about people not wanting politics in their comics. And then it became something completely different, I guess. And, there's people, again, Ethan Van Sciver is the Antichrist for some of them. And then other people, he's the savior. And, it's just like there's a craziness going on over there that in Facebook, you never really even.
But that's just people being sheep. Honestly, that's just two groups. That's Democrats, Republicans. It's always the same thing, and it's noise that, no offense to you, I just don't give time to on my show. Support who you want and leave it alone. Twitter is usually the human trash chute of thoughts. It's like, I have a thought, here it is, blah. It is the thought bubble of humanity, and it should never be looked at. But
no, you're not offending me, because I wasn't really using it much, but I did now peek my head in there, especially in the last Kickstarter, little promotionals there. And I just saw that happening. I was like, wow, this is pretty intense over here.
Yeah, that's Twitter for you. Meredith.
I love Twitter, first of all, but I have a couple of accounts there, and I have a couple of troll accounts just so that I can misbehave. Because the one that everybody knows is well behaved. I'm kind of like the Clark Kent and the Superman, or evil Superman, if you will. But
Meredith's really Ethan. We never knew it. Now it all makes sense.
There you go.
I do. I have my split personalities there, and the Grinch cartoon where his little antenna kind of go out, and he's got this shit-eating grin. When my husband comes home and he sees that look on my face, he knows that I've been trolling on Twitter. So, but having said that, going back to the PC culture thing, I want to say that as content creators, it is our responsibility, our absolute responsibility, to push back on the PC culture. And we need to be as loud as possible. We need to, I don't want to say we need to shout them down, but we need to be loud, but we need to be respectful. We cannot devolve into down to their level of just saying, oh, you're racist just because you have an opinion. Because what I'm seeing is that you have a lot of people who think that their opinion is much more important than yours or mine. And when you get to a point where you can't have a discussion because you're so closed off, because you think your opinion is not only more important, but you think your opinion is fact, that becomes very dangerous. So we need to push back, but we need to be respectful, and we need to be firm and say, hey, check yourself. And if you don't like the way I'm writing this character because I see it based on my experiences or my research or this history, this factual history, that's if you're writing a period piece, try to be true to the history. If you don't like it, walk away. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. And you know what? Take your $5 back. I don't want you to buy my book. We have to be firm about that because our voices are just as important, and we have to represent what we feel is true, if we're being authentic. And I think that's also important. You can be a shill and you can sell your soul to the devil if you want to. But in the long run, I don't think you're going to have an authentic audience either. So I think it's really important to be firm, and push back, and be true to your characters and be true to the work and the effort that you put into creating this piece, whatever it is that you decide that you're going to share out into the world.
Now, Meredith, as someone who's actually read my book, one of the few people who've actually talked about it publicly that have read it, do you think that as a man I nailed a female narrative?
I think when I actually, and I still call it a workbook, I think that it is universal. I think that it covers men and women, and it gives them a tool to have an open discussion with each other through really uncomfortable topics. Like, how far do you want to go? What do you want to do with this? Would you be willing to try? What's on your no list? And I think that's universal. I don't think that's based on sex at all. I think it's or gender. I think it's based on opening up the conversation and having an authentic, real, deep, meaningful conversation.
Oh, I thank you. One thing I do want to cover, and I think that we didn't get to talk about this yet, how important is your lettering as opposed to, even for a novelist, when do you use bolding out to make a point? When do you use italics? How important is that to you guys when it comes to dialogue? Let's start with you, Dan. For your lettering, how important is it? Do characters have their own special font or possible even a different colored balloon?
Yeah, you know what? Actually, recently on the caption boxes, sometimes it gets confusing in a lot of places where, okay, now who exactly is talking? Is it a character? Usually what's used is quotation marks, but being that I have a team book, even that becomes a little confusing. And the fact that you could have a character talking in a caption box, you have 5 characters in the panel, it becomes a little challenging as to, okay, now who is saying that? Sometimes by the dialogue you can tell based on the manner of speech or actually the reaction who it is. But what I've begun using with my letterer is the fact that most of the characters have 2 primary colors in their costume. So what we could do is have the caption box in the primary color of the costume with the border in the secondary color of the costume, and that'll help differentiate who is speaking. I did want to make one point on this politically correct thing because I didn't get to chime in with this fact. I have some insider information on that, and the fact that I think the comics community is going to get a lot less judgmental about what the content in the comics. We're going to see that shift because comics are moving into a more disposable realm of entertainment. In the upcoming months, we will see comics printed on the surplus of toilet paper. So that's now you know that that's going to be coming up.
See, I thought Marvel was already doing that with their comic books, making toilet paper. Oh, surplus of toilet paper.
You can use as toilet paper.
Oh, surplus. I got confused. I thought you meant what we could use for toilet paper. Okay, I'm sorry. What were you going to say, Varian? I saw you come on.
I was just thinking, I think it helps when if you read back those word balloons, or you read back through your text, and when you're saying it, you actually put the italicization. Is that a word? Italicization and bold a wording in then, because it's so stressed that those words you want to stress that you find then through another read through, and maybe even your last read through of the book. We tend to do that. I pull everything up in the word balloons and then go back over it again. And then, what I've written this character said, I'm going to, like, if you have a character says, oh, I'm going to kill him. That statement I made, that O might need to be italicized, and that kill needs to be that. I'll put that in bold. So, I'm going to kill him. It's inflection. And I think that the readers, it helps when the reader's reading that, because they're hearing these characters in their own heads, or they give those characters their own unique voices, not necessarily the voice you gave them. So it helps that anything you can do to make that character as close to how you wrote them and how you want them to be perceived is really, really important. So yeah, I think that is important. I know that I had some X-Men books where Gambit and Rogue sometimes are wrote with very heavy dialect, and you can see the accents and how they wrote. And then 2 months later, you got another writer on the book who doesn't do any of that, and it kind of takes you out of it a little bit, because it's like, wait a minute, I just spent 5 months with this writer who does do that, and now we got this new guy on here who doesn't. It kind of feels like a different character, even though it's the same character. It just feels a little different. It happens in movies too. I don't know if you guys noticed that, but X-Men, Halle Berry in X-Men 1 had a horrible accent, African accent, and then she dropped it for the rest of them. Even Scarlet Witch in the Marvel MCU movies, she's her first appearance, was it Civil War? She had a thicker accent than what they let her use now. And I know that's film compared to comics, but if you watch those films back to back, it's like, what happened there? Why did she totally drop the accent? I guess because accents could be hard to do, and they're hard to write too. I've tried, and that's why I don't do it because I can't do it very well. But if you put italicization and italicize and make words bold, just to make sure that the character is speaking in the tone and the direction, vocal direction that you need them to, then I think that's very important. In fact, everyone needs to do it when they're making a book.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you with Rogue and Gambit. I was a huge fan. Jaxie. I was a huge fan of Rogue and Gambit, and it really took me out when they got rid of it, especially Gambit, because Gambit had that New Orleans jaw, and it really defined him. And for him to suddenly lose that, especially when Apocalypse took him on, that was jarring to me. And I definitely think that, at least to me, if you are going to be creating a character and taking it over, you have to stay true to the original vision of the character. But that's just me being a fan. I'm a big old fat geek, and I'm always going to be a geek, and I'm always going to enjoy my fandom.
I want to say this, Rob. I've been notified by standards and practices that I was incorrect. Scarlet Witch's first appearance in the MCU was in Age of Ultron. Her first full appearance was in Age of Ultron. I was corrected by my son, standards and practices.
Yeah, but didn't he show up in Captain America? I am right.
At the end with the miracles, I think that may have been one, but there's a little scene at the end, a little snip scene, but they don't count that. Apparently, that doesn't.
Yes, they do. The experience in a comic book is always the first time we see it, whether they interact or not. Stop it. Unless it's shadowy, and they were not shadowy. They were introduced in that movie on purpose. It goes, no. This is comic books. You go play that game with like Lord of the Rings or whatever they do over there with that Wizard of Oz or Wizard of Harry Potter stuff. I don't know. Kids stuff. We get a lot of angry letters for that one. Harry Potter is the best. How could you? I feel like the scene in Clerks where they're talking about Star Wars and Lord of the Rings. Like, no, Lord of the Rings is good. Are you kidding me? Have you seen Star Wars?
Yeah, I'm a fan of all of it. I will admit I have my favorites. But usually the debate comes down for me between Lord of the Rings and Star Wars. That's when, there's a big debate between me and some of my friends as to which one is better. And usually we I fall on the side of Star Wars. And they'll be like, oh, well, Star Wars doesn't, at least, Lord of the Rings doesn't have any shitty sequels or prequels. I'm like, oh, doesn't it? It doesn't it? But yeah, we get into arguments about that. But we won't do that here. We won't do that.
We actually have a panel next week where you can come on and have that whole argument. It's comics to media. And you could actually do that because technically Lord of the Rings is written word. So we'll count it.
You should do it. You should do it at night after 9 o'clock so I can swear.
We swear during the day. This is quarantine, baby. There are no more fucking rules. Society's over. Yay!
Star Wars or Lord of the Rings?
Yeah.
Isn't Star Trek the most logical choice?
I don't know. They keep rebooting it. Which one are you talking about? Oh, snap. Oh, snap. No. On the final question for the panel today, and this one's just a fun one for all you guys. When you are reading a comic book or reading a book and it's already been adapted to a media such as television or a movie, do you now hear that character's voice when you're reading it? As an example, whenever I read a Batman comic, I hear Kevin Conroy speaking as Batman, no matter when I'm reading it. That's just how it will always be for me. Do you guys find that to be true with your fandom when you're reading dialogue?
Luckily, I don't hear Christian Bale because the guy needed like a cough drop or something. So, yeah, nah, I don't know about that. Like, I don't think like all the MCU guys really show up in my head reading a Marvel. Not that I read a lot of Marvel anyway, and I guess that's the advantage of the indies is the fact that most of these don't have a multimedia representation, so you can kind of develop and then be shocked, I guess, when they do their own little animated short or even their Kickstarter video to hear, the creator's vision.
For me, it is that way. Not for Kevin Conroy. I mean, he's a big part of what my Batman sounds like. I can't really describe it, but it is heavy Kevin Conroy. For me, the Ninja Turtles all sound like they're like the 80s cartoon. They don't. That's what I hear. I hear Rob Paulson as Raphael all the time. I don't hear anybody else. Even as I watch movies, I still hear Rob Paulson. And I've told him that when I met him at cons.
Did it mess with you when he played different turtles?
It does. Because it seems like it's a betrayal, and I don't like it. But at least he's still working. So and he's still back. He's still in that respect. At least he's still a turtle because they recognize how important that voice is to one of those turtles. I also for things like X-Men, I hear like the 90s X-Men, except for me, says Stephen Bloom. It's gonna be like my Wolverine forever. He gives the voice in X-Men Wolverine, Wolverine the X-Men, and he does the voice in most of the games now. So that's pretty cool. But then we do always have our own voices. I mean, I think everyone here has a Captain America voice, what he must sound like, and it's I'm okay with Chris Evans' portrayal of it, but I have a Captain America voice myself, and I think it's up here. It's above reproach. Kind of sounds
I hear the Australian Wolverine from Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends.
Oh dear God!
Anytime I read a comic.
Oh no!
No, I'm only kidding.
How you doing, love? Want a piece of fruit? Oh.
Spider-Man with Iceman and Firestar. They had
Yeah.
X-Men guest star.
Yeah,
Wolverine was Australian.
I remember being so shocked about that. And prior to the X-Men, he was Australian too. And I remember thinking like, but his card says he's a Canadian.
Yeah,
I
right.
don't understand this. Why is this happening? But I was okay with it. I mean, I was happy when the 80s cartoon gave him that dark voice.
True story.
Crikey, Magneto.
Yeah.
True story. The reason I got into comics was that Pride of X-Men.
Mm-hmm.
And they had that Australian voice. So I've always thought of him that way, and I didn't realize how Canadian people spoke until I heard like someone point out they were Canadian in that Blame Canada movie. And I was like, oh, I thought they just sounded like that. I had no idea that Canadians didn't sound Australian.
Don't worry, Dingo will make it. I remember when he couldn't get through a tunnel or something in that movie, and probably the X-Men and Wolverine said, don't worry, Dingo will make sure we can. And I'm like, oh, I was like 8 or something. And I'm like, why? Why? He sounds like Crocodile Dundee. This changes everything. But Wolverine is my favorite character. Will always be. And no matter what they do to him in Marvel, and they're trying a lot. I have the back issues. I can go back to those. I can go back and read that. In fact, my character is heavily influenced by Wolverine. Heavily, but he doesn't have claws or anything. That would have been straight up copying. But yeah, I hear those voices. Meredith, do you hear voices at all? I don't know if you answered already.
I usually the voices in my head are stronger than the ones on the screen. And so I really tried to make a conscious effort to read the book or read the comic before I actually watched the movie. And I mean, quite honestly, the voices that I hear on the screen is just noise, unless they're James Earl Jones or Samuel L. Jackson or, Susan Sarandon with, where they have such distinct voices that you can pick them out in anything that they do. And because of that, I think it's forgiven whether they go, if they go from character to character. I mean, obviously James Earl Jones, he could never read Han Solo, when it comes to voices and hopping within a character. I mean, within a movie or, a project. But I thought it was really interesting that you said about the voice of one of the Ninja Turtles and that it was. What was it that you said that it was? Oh shoot! I just had a brain fart.
Well, would always be Rob Paulson to me. Like I was always I always hear him, even though he's gone on the voice.
And then when he hopped over to a different character, you just felt that it was a betrayal. That was the word, and I just thought that was interesting because not everybody is Mel Blanc either. With the man with 1,000 voices. Yeah. And so for me, unless it's a really, really distinct voice, it's just background noise. And I really think of it more of the voices in my head. They have more power. I just don't let them loose very often. They're only allowed on paper.
When I'm, when I'm even writing your own characters, you have voices in your head for them. My main character, he has a very low, gravelly voice, but very calm. I would say it's calm but gravelly, and so that also depicts how it has a that also has a big influence on how he's written. So, but and then again, it's weird because has anyone ever thought about how they would? Oh, well, first of all, if I pick up a comic, if I see a character that's based off a celebrity, for instance, Wanted, the main character in Wanted in the comic is based off of the appearance of Eminem. So when I read that Wanted comic, every time I read him, I'm hearing M's voice. Like that's it. I can't.
Do you ever have a character in your head that their voice doesn't match what you're drawing? I mean, for instance, like Mike Tyson. Okay, he's this big guy, and he's got this like high squeaky voice, and you're like, what the hell? You know, I'm
Yeah.
afraid of you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you try to develop characters that are, you know, like that, or you know, do any of your characters kind of surprise you?
I got a character like that. He's a big guy, but I wanted him to have this baby like voice. Say, I mean, he's like a huge, like muscle bound guy, but he has this baby like voice, and he doesn't like violence. And I thought that was funny. And I didn't think on Mike Tyson when I thought it, but yeah, Mike Tyson has that stuff. Oh my goodness, no, I didn't mean to hurt you. I'm sorry. Voice. It's like, whoa, crap. You know, you're supposed to be.
One of my favorite characters is Lance Armstrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, okay. So, and he's like this big guy, and he's always throwing off his shirt and he's ripping it and stuff like that. But he cries at the drop of a hat, and I just love him so much, you know. And it's not the type of character that you expect, you know, by looking at him. So I think those are gems when we can find them, and when people do them right, is just it really makes them endearing, you know.
Yeah, I think that when you do characters like that, it's like you said, it does make them endearing. It's kind of like Rob. Rob looks like a big scary guy, but you know, everyone knows he's a big softie. In fact, I have it on good authority that Rob is seeking counseling because of Toy Story 4.
It's not right. He didn't deserve to be written off that way. I'm just saying it's the wrong approach. The show should have been about him. Why is Buzzier now get to stay? It's all wrong. It's all wrong.
Yeah, I will admit, I don't know if you guys seen Toy Story 4, but I waited till the family left and I boohooed. That's some BS. I was not emotionally prepared for that. But yeah. That's it. That's all I'll say about that.
So, now that we were all sad because of having to bring that up, it's time for us to say goodbye, our friends. I have a 5-year-old trying to get my attention, and we all got to get back to, you know, the wonders of quarantine. There's so much to do. There's Netflix, Hulu, music. Netflix, Hulu, music. Wait a minute. Are we stuck in Groundhog Day? Oh, my God, we're stuck in Groundhog Day. Someone help me.
Scratching and drinking.
No, this is sober. That's just different voices. See, that's dialogue, kids. Learn that right. All right.
And making comics, right?
Yeah.
Say your goodbyes one last time.
Time.
Actually stayed, and they're still here. Tell them how they can be fans of you like I am. We'll start with Meredith because she's at the top of the screen.
I'm at the top of the screen, guys. I'm Meredith Lochran. I'm with GeekInsider.com. I do Lady Geek Live on Sundays at 5 Eastern. Tune in. Visit us on GeekInsider.com. That is where you're going to find all of our social media links. And Geek Out Virtual Con, April 11th through 12th. I know it's Easter. Don't worry. You are a captive audience, so you have nothing else to do. You want to be there. We have a lot of panels, we have a lot of guests, and we have door prizes. It's free, so come on by.
And Dan Sehn of Argo Comics, ARGO Comics, argocomics.com, Argo Comics. Well, no, I think I'm Dan Sehn at Twitter, at Dan Sehn on Twitter. But Facebook, we have Argo Comics Facebook page, Indie Planet, where you can search Argo Comics there. That's where all our products are, both in print and digitally. For anyone who is in quarantine, digital comics is a great resource. And YouTube channel, Argo Comics. So yeah, pretty much go anywhere on any website. Go to, wherever you shop for your door handles and curtains. Just type in Argo Comics. You'll still find us. We're all over.
And of course, I am Varian the Kid Grant, also known as Optimia Servers. I can be found at KYD, that's why you spell kid, KYD _V on Twitter, Varian Grant on Facebook, a couple other places. You can find my publishing company, Last Call Comics, at lastcallcomics.com, and just look up Last Call Comics on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We're there, as well as Indievolt Media, which I started, indievolt.com, INDIEVOLT.com. Indie Vote TV on your Roku if you want to watch some streaming independent movies, and then Indie Vote Radio on Google. And if you want to listen to it on Android, you have to download an app called Streema, Streema. And you can listen to Indie Vote Radio there. We are working to get that streamlined a little bit so you can just download the app right to your iOS device. But for the meantime, all that stuff is free too. Indie Vote Radio, Indie Vote TV, it's all free. So, in this time of being locked in the house and practicing social distancing, why not check out some good quality indie entertainment?
Thank you, everyone, for showing up. It's been another great edition of the On Con. I thank all the guests for being here today, and more panels to come. We'll talk to you all later. Bye now.